tenets, holding the first place, the primacy. We look at verse 18 of St. Paul's letter to the Colossians, chapter 1, where it speaks of how Christ has the primacy in all things. St. Paul tells us, again, he is the head of his body, the church. He who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he may have the first place, the primacy. To have primacy in all things, visible and invisible. This is what we want to look at in our program today. Jesus Christ is the head of the church. Now, Blessed John Duns Scotus sees the church as all of the celestial court under the headship of Christ, angels and men. And this is a serious point. St. Paul speaks of Jesus as the head of every power and principality in chapter 2 of the Colossians and in other places as well. So if Jesus is the head of the angels, this would indicate that his predestination, the predestination of his humanity to this union with God in the hypostatic union, the incarnation, that this isn't occasioned by sin, because the good angels did not sin, and yet Jesus, the Word made flesh, is the head of the whole heavenly court, the head of every power and principality. He holds the first place in all things. As we noted in one of our earlier programs on this chapter of Colossians, Jesus is the firstborn of every creature, of all creation, indicating that before God willed the angels, before God willed men, he first willed Christ, predestined his sacred humanity to grace and glory. And this would be, as we noted, it would be a sort of a proof, an indication that Jesus was thought of first, was the firstborn, the first thought of God, even before the angels and men. If you don't hold this, if you don't hold that Jesus is the head in the sense that an absolute primacy, sin or no sin, what you end up saying is that there are two economies of grace. And this is how we can explain that. For the Thomists, the ones that would hold that Jesus came primarily or exclusively to redeem man from sin, there would be two economies of grace. There would be the first initial economy of grace, that original economy under which you find Adam and Eve and the angels, the gratia Dei, the grace of God, the economy of God's grace without the fall. And then after the fall, God willed a second economy of grace, which was even better, the gratia Christi. And so this would apply to fallen man. So you have two economies of grace, the gratia Dei before the fall for angels and Adam and Eve, and then the gratia Christi, the grace of Christ, the economy after the fall of Adam and Eve for fallen mankind. In this system, the angels, yes, they are under Christ insofar as he is the eternal Word, he is God who created them, but not so much under the headship of Christ, the Word made flesh per se. Whereas for the Franciscan thesis, there's only one economy of grace, the gratia Christi, so that every grace for angels and men comes through the mediation of Christ, that one mediator, that one through whom we come to know the Father, through whom we experience his grace, his glory, and our promised everlasting life. I'd like to read from a quote from St. Anastasius of Sinai, a 7th century church father, who obviously wrote before the time of the Franciscan order, before we even existed, before we could even speak of a Franciscan thesis. This is what he writes. He writes that all creation, visible and invisible, was first constructed and prefigured according to her image, the church, and that of Christ, her spouse. For this is the mystery which God first predestined before the ages and generations. Now, when the apostle of God says all things, both visible and invisible, were created in Christ, he plainly shows and teaches that even the invisible creature was prefigured and made in Christ and the church. St. Anastasius is pointing out that the angel, the invisible creatures, are predestined in Christ, that the first mystery that God saw was Christ and his mystical body, the church, and that the angels are seen under the headship of Christ. So first, Christ, the Alpha, the beginning, the first. Not just the final end after the fall, but he is the firstborn of all creation, the first willed by God, and as a result, the angels are under the headship of Christ. We'll look more at this theme of the angels in the next episode as we talk about the test of the angels. What was the test that separated the angels, the good angels, from the demons, those wicked spirits? Come back and see us in our next episode. And God bless you.